Well, I'm speaking to senior economist and author, Professor Steve Keen. He's a distinguished research fellow at the Institute for Strategy, Resilience and Security at the University College London. Many thanks for speaking to Times Now, sir. Now, the situation in West Asia has once again reached a level of uncertainty after a ceasefire had been agreed upon. The Straits of Hormuz, which is of course a critical artery for nearly a fifth of global oil supply, has reportedly been closed to a large extent by Iran following Israeli strikes in Lebanon. Now, we're also seeing signs of panic in shipping. Now, in this backdrop, how serious is this moment for the global economy?
It's extremely serious for the global economy because nothing can be reduced without energy. A little saying I came up with is that labour without energy is a corpse and machinery without energy is a sculpture. So unless you have energy, you can't produce output. And the link is extremely solid. If there's a 10% fall in energy at the global level, then there's a 10% fall in GDP at the global level. So that's the major danger we face. That's we're removing what powers the global economy from the global economy. Equally, there are major issues with availability of other products that are side effects of drilling for oil, and they specifically, the major ones are fertiliser, and about something of the order of 20% of the world's fertiliser passes through the Strait of Hormuz when it's open. 30% of the world's helium, and that's absolutely critical for high-tech industries. And again, something of the order of 20 or 30% of the world's sulfuric acid, and that is vital for so many manufacturing processes. So we're having major, irreplaceable elements of the production system damaged by this conflict, and it implies both a substantial fall in GDP this year, making it very hard for the computer chip industry to proceed as normal. So less computer chips, less computers, less AI workstations, and in unavailability of fertiliser, which if that coincides when fertiliser is needed for a growing season, then quite likely famines all over the world.
Now, there are conflicting reports, of course, emerging about the extent to which the Strait of Hormuz is open. We'll wait and see as to how that situation evolves. But how do markets interpret warnings from Donald Trump? Do they interpret them as a stabilizing deterrence or signals that actually end up increasing volatility and risk premiums across oil and financial systems?
I think Trump is actually causing this volatility, whether it's him doing it or whether people behind him. They're using the volatility as a way of gaming the markets and getting insider trading gains. That seems to be the only explanation for mysterious trades that occur about 15 minutes before Trump makes an announcement, which pick the correct direction that's going to come out of whatever his announcement might be. So he'll say something which causes oil markets to plunge, and then something else which causes oil markets to rise, and either side, just before the announcement goes out, large trades are being made that must, either they're clairvoyant or they have insider information. And with that combination, this volatility is ludicrously high, courtesy of this period.
You've in fact also spoken about insider trading. You've also argued that energy and economic output move almost in a one-to-one ratio. Now, in a scenario where tensions have choked the Straits of Hormuz to a significant extent, are we looking at a dangerous mix of both market manipulation and a real economic shock that could force a situation far worse, some say, than what we witnessed during COVID-19? Or is that an alarmist scenario?
That's the main danger, that the losing 10 to 20% of the world's energy supply and 20 to 30% of fertiliser and essential inputs for production in terms of sulfur, sulfuric acid and helium, it's going to make COVID look like a picnic. So a dramatic drop in production, and this is already feeding through the supply chains because the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for over a month now. So supplies which would normally be arriving in the next 1 or 2 months of oil and of fertiliser are not going to arrive, and therefore if the timing is bad, and this is quite feasible, countries that run out of stocks of fertiliser won't be able to fertilise the next crop, and you could see a fall in yields of something of the order of 50% for a lot of countries.
Now, you've also pointed towards $580 million in oil bets that have been placed before Donald Trump's Iran announcement. Now, if traders were able to position themselves ahead of a war-related decision with such precision, does this point towards insider trading on a geopolitical scale? And how do we even begin to prove or regulate something like that?
It does indicate market manipulation on a global scale. And this is horrific because this is global manipulation of markets, which may cause people to die en masse because of the impact of food supplies. So it's absolutely criminal inside behaviour if that is what is happening. So we should definitely investigate it. And of course, at the moment, I would not trust any American institution to investigate any other American institution. So we'd need to have international stock exchanges, international authorities checking and seeing whether this insider trading has occurred and trying to track down who's responsible. But this is it's almost like the American government has been taken over by the Mafia, and they're doing a shakedown, typical Mafia shakedown, to get money out of the rest of the world. It is a absolutely criminal use of the political power of the presidency.
So are you now in a situation where we could possibly be witnessing the beginning of the end of American economic hegemony? And if so, what kind of global financial system could realistically replace it amid the ongoing supply chain and energy disruptions that we've been witnessing?
We are seeing the end of American hegemony. Ironically, it's at the 250th anniversary of the American independence. So this empire has lasted 1/4 of a millennium, which is roughly how long empires normally last in human history. So that's, in that sense, it's rather ironic that this is happening during the 250th year. The reason American hegemony occurred was because at Bretton Woods, the Americans imposed the decision to use the American dollar for international trade on the global system. There was an alternative put forward by Keynes, which was to create a neutral unit of account for international trade he called the Bancor, and countries would have to import and export through the Bancor system, and it was also set up in such a way to minimise the scale of trade deficits and trade surpluses. That's what we should have had. And if we have any luck in this particular crisis, then the new system will be based on Keynes's ideas of a neutral unit of account for international trade rather than a domestic currency. There is some possibility of that. The reason that we had a cooperation after World War II was people are so horrified by what happened in World War II, they were willing to concede controls over their own capacity to use their economy as a weapon against another system. Unfortunately, because the Americans dominated, we've got a system which is always going to break down. And so from 1944 on, it's only been a question of time until something like this happened. And Trump has simply accelerated the process by his ridiculous war. The problem about a national currency being used for international trade is that it overvalues that country's currency. And because it's overvalued, its manufacturing sector can't compete with the rest of the world. And over time, that means that the country loses power, another one rises to take its place. China's been rising as America's been sinking, and now we're seeing the Americans no longer being able to maintain their power hegemony over the world because they've lost the manufacturing system to China. China is now the dominant country on the planet. I just hope it doesn't make the same mistake that America made of wanting to have its currency used for international trade. We should never have enabled that. When it is now possible to set up a system electronically where there would be no national currency used for international trade, that's the system we need on the other side of this crisis.
Now, does this particular crisis also present an opportunity for several countries, including India, to improve on their energy diversification? So, of course, countries that are turning to renewable sources, solar energy. India is, of course, a country that's also part of the Global Solar Alliance as well. Do you see this moment as a strategic turning point which could perhaps begin a transition further away from fossil fuels?
Yes, this is one of the lessons coming out of what's happening in the in the Middle East, that people who are against solar power and wind used to say, well, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. But the sun always shines and the wind always blows somewhere on the planet, whereas the Strait of Hormuz can be shut off, as we've seen right now. So in that sense, the critical necessity for energy shows that you can't rely upon a single source of energy, which happens with oil. You either get oil from the Middle East or from Russia or from America fundamentally, and Canada and Venezuela. Those are 5 potential breakage points, and we've just seen one of the biggest ones broken by this whole crisis. Venezuela is going to be equally damaged by what Trump has done to Venezuela, so it's showing that fossil fuel energy is unreliable. Far more so than solar, far more so than wind, far more so than nuclear. So it's far better for countries to set up systems involving both renewable energy and nuclear to ensure that they've got sufficient energy on their own territory and they're therefore protected from international conflicts like this one.
Well, a final question in the context of what India has also been experiencing, given the prevailing uncertainty now that hangs over the Strait of Hormuz, what kind of preparedness strategy should be prioritized by large-scale oil importing countries such as India?
Well, it's basically get off oil as fast as you can, electrify, to replace all the systems that currently use diesel or petrol with electric power. Look at what China has been doing on that front. Build the infrastructure to enable yourself to have a fossil fuel-free transportation system. That's critical. So I think that's what countries have to do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your insights on Times Now.